The wind screamed across the frozen ridge like something dying. Lieutenant Garrett Sullivan pressed his body flat against the snow-covered rock. Thermal scanner raised his eyes, breath fogging in the -30 air. Behind him, 11 of the most dangerous men he had ever commanded waited in absolute silence, white winter camouflage rendering them ghosts against the endless white of the mountain. 6 weeks of planning, 14 days of infiltration through terrain that should have been impassable. And now, finally, Outpost 7 rose from the blizzard like a crumbling tombstone, its ancient stone walls barely visible through the screaming snow. Sullivan smiled beneath his balaclava. The thermal scanner painted exactly what intelligence had promised. 2 heat signatures. Just 2 pathetic defenders huddled inside that frozen ruin, probably sharing a propane heater, probably counting the hours until their rotation ended, probably dreaming of anywhere but this frozen hell at the edge of the world. 2 exhausted, demoralized soldiers against 12 of the deadliest infiltrators in the theater. This wasn't even going to be a fight. Reaper actual to all elements, Sullivan whispered into his throat mic, confirming 2 signatures. Central structure, ground floor. No patrols, no secondary positions, no movement. This is exactly what we were promised. 12 clicks answered him. 12 professionals ready to execute. Breach team, you have the main entrance. Rear element, cover the back exit. Overwatch, find the elevation and put glass on those windows. Sullivan's fingers found the safety on his suppressed MP7. We go in 90 seconds. This end tonight. If that opening hooked you, trust me, you are not ready for what happens next. Subscribe now for more incredible stories of courage in combat, and hit that notification bell. Now, let me show you the woman they never saw coming. 300 meters from the crumbling outpost, buried beneath 17 inches of fresh snow, Specialist Hannah Westbrook did not move. She had not moved in 6 hours. Before that, she had shifted position exactly once in 47 hours, and only because the wind had threatened to expose a corner of her thermal masking blanket. The blanket had cost her 3 months of hazard pay, custom engineered to trap body heat, disperse it gradually through micro vents along the edges, render her invisible to exactly the kind of thermal scanners currently sweeping her position. The scanner beam passed over her hide for the 7th time. It found nothing. Hannah's eyes remained fixed on the scope of her rifle, tracking the figures as they separated into their assigned elements. Breach team moving left, rear element circling right. 2 men climbing toward the elevated rocks that would give them overwatch on the outpost's eastern windows. 12 targets. She had counted them when they first appeared at the ridgeline 40 minutes ago, and she had been tracking their movements with the patient precision of a woman who had done this 47 times before. 48 confirmed kills over 3 years. 0 misses. Not one. Her heart rate held steady at 58 beats per minute. Inside the outpost, Private Fleming and Specialist Porter were exactly where she had placed them 6 hours ago, huddled around a propane heater in the central room, their combined body heat and the heater's output creating a perfect thermal signature. 2 soldiers. Exactly what enemy intelligence expected to find. They didn't know they were bait. They didn't need to know. Hannah watched the breach team stack on the main entrance, shape charge already pressed against the ancient wooden door. She watched the rear element take position behind a snow-covered boulder, weapons trained on the back exit. She watched the Overwatch pair settle into their elevated position, night vision goggles, sweeping the terrain around the outpost. None of them looked in her direction. Why would they? Their thermal scanners showed empty snow. Their intelligence showed a skeleton garrison. Their 6 weeks of planning showed an easy target, an in-and-out operation, a chance to recover the encrypted intelligence that Outpost 7's communication relay had been intercepting for months. They had no idea that the intelligence had already told Hannah they were coming. They had no idea that she had been waiting for them since before they crossed the border. They had no idea that in 90 seconds, most of them would be dead. Sullivan's voice crackled through the night. All elements, 30 seconds. Breach on my mark. Hannah's fingers settled against the trigger guard of her rifle. Not the trigger. Not yet. Trigger discipline until the moment of first engagement. That was what Gunnery Sergeant Rebecca Stone had taught her, what seemed like a lifetime ago. What seemed like someone else's lifetime. 20 seconds. The breach team adjusted their position, Lead man gripping the detonator. Second man ready to flow through the door the moment the charge blew. Standard procedure. Textbook execution. These were not amateurs. It didn't matter. 10 seconds. Hannah exhaled slowly. For seconds in. Hold. 6 seconds out. Her breath froze in the air above her hide, but the thermal blanket captured the warmth before it could create a visible plume. Years of training reduced to muscle memory. Years of loss reduced to absolute stillness. 5 seconds. Her scope settled on the overwatch position first. The two men on the elevated rocks were her primary threat. They had the best angle to spot her muzzle flash, the best chance of returning accurate fire. They would die first. Mark. The breach charge detonated with a thunderous crack that split the frozen night. The ancient door exploded inward. Splinters were spraying into the outpost's interior. The lead breacher flowed through the gap, weapon up, sweeping left. Hannah fired. The first round caught the Overwatch sniper in the throat, severing his carotid and dropping him before his partner could register the sound. The suppressed rifle coughed once, a sound swallowed by the howling wind, and by the time the second Overwatch soldier turned toward the muzzle flash, Hannah had already shifted her aim. The second round punched through his night vision goggles and out the back of his skull. 2 down, 10 remaining. Elapsed time, 3 seconds. Hannah was already moving, not running. That would create heat signature, disturb snow, leave tracks. She rolled from her primary hide into the secondary position she had prepared 47 hours ago, bringing the thermal blanket with her in a single fluid motion. By the time she settled into the new firing position, she was invisible again. The breach team had already realized something was wrong. Inside the outpost, Private Fleming and Specialist Porter had hit the floor the moment the door exploded, exactly as Hannah had instructed. The propane heater still burned beside them, still creating the thermal signature that had drawn Sullivan's team into the trap. But the breach team wasn't finding resistance. They were finding 2 terrified soldiers with their hands over their heads. What the? The lead breacher's confusion carried through his throat mic, picked up by the intercepted frequency Hannah had been monitoring for days. 2 personnel, non-combatant posture. Where's the threat? Overwatch is down. Another voice, panic bleeding through professional control. Keller and Morrison are down. We have fire from. Hannah's third round cut off his transmission. The breach team's communication specialist jerked backward as the bullet destroyed his radio pack and continued through his spine. He was dead before he hit the floor, and his team's primary communication link died with him. 8 remaining. Elapsed time, 7 seconds. Sullivan's voice screamed to the secondary channel. Contact north! Contact north! Sniper in the... Hannah fired twice in rapid succession. The first round struck the rear element's point man in the chest, his ballistic vest absorbing most of the impact, but the hydrostatic shock dropping him to his knees. The second round found the gap between his helmet and vest as he fell, ending his confusion permanently. The soldier beside him dove behind the boulder, cursing into his radio, but Hannah had already anticipated the movement. Her scope tracked the heat signature as it moved. The boulder provided cover from direct fire, but the soldier's breath created a visible plume above the rock. She didn't need to see him. She just needed to know where he was. The round punched through the boulder's weathered edge, fragmented against the stone, and the fragments found the soldier's face. He screamed, a sound Hannah heard distantly through the howling wind, and then he didn't. 7 remaining. Elapsed time, 11 seconds. Inside the outpost chaos. The breach team was trapped in a nightmare they couldn't understand. They had trained for ambushes, trained for sniper fire, trained for exactly the scenario. But their training assumed they could identify the threat. Their training assumed they could find a muzzle flash, calculate the trajectory, return fire, or find cover. They couldn't find her. The thermal scanners showed nothing. The night vision goggles revealed nothing but snow and stone and the crumbling walls of an outpost that was rapidly becoming their tomb. The muzzle flash came from a different position each time, and by the time they turned to engage, it had already stopped. Smoke. Deploy smoke. Grenades arced through the shattered doorway, clattering across the snow-covered ground. White phosphorus bloomed in the darkness. creating a wall of concealment between the outpost and the northern approach. Standard counter-sniper doctrine. Create visual obstruction, mask heat signatures, by time to maneuver. Hannah had seen this tactic twice before. It hadn't worked then either. She shifted her aim to the eastern approach, where the smoke screen was thinnest. The wind was coming from the northwest at 18 kilometers per hour. She had measured hourly since arriving at her initial position, and the smoke would drift southeast within 30 seconds. She'd need 30 seconds. The first soldier emerged from the smoke at a dead sprint, trying to reach the rocks where his Overwatch team had been positioned. He was fast, well-trained, moving in an unpredictable pattern designed to throw off a sniper's lead calculation. Hannah led him by 8 inches. The round caught him mid-stride, center mass, and his momentum carried him 3 more steps before his body understood that it was dead. He collapsed face first into the snow, and the white powder began covering him immediately. 6 remaining. Elapsed time, 15 seconds. Jesus Christ. Sullivan's voice had lost its professional calm. Where is she? Where the fuck is? The secondary radio on his belt exploded. Hannah's round had traveled 300 meters through a blizzard, through 18 km per hour crosswind, through visibility measured in dozens of meters, and struck a target smaller than her palm. The radio disintegrated. Sullivan screamed as shrapnel tore through his hip, and then he was on the ground, bleeding, his primary communication link destroyed by a shooter he still couldn't see. His team's coordination died with that radio. 5 remaining. 23 seconds elapsed. And for the first time in the engagement, Hannah allowed herself a moment of satisfaction. 3 years and 4 months ago, the woman who would become the Valkyrie had been someone else entirely. Specialist Hannah Westbrook, age 21, had been good, better than good. She had been one of the most promising snipers to come through the advanced marksmanship program in a decade, with natural talent that her instructors said couldn't be taught. But talent wasn't everything. Talent needed tempering. Talent needed mentorship. Talent needed Rebecca Stone. Gunnery Sergeant Rebecca Stone had been a legend before Hannah ever met her. 47 confirmed kills across 3 deployments. A confirmed hit at 1,200 meters in a crosswind that should have made the shot impossible. The kind of shooter that other snipers told stories about, the kind of operator that enemy commanders learned to fear by name. She had taken one look at Hannah Westbrook and seen something worth shaping. "You're fast," Stone had said during their first training session. "Fast hands, fast eyes, fast trigger. You know what fast gets you in this job?" Hannah had not answered. "Fast gets you dead." Stone's voice had been quiet, measured, the voice of a woman who had learned patience through decades of waiting. Fast makes you move before you're ready. Fast makes you shoot before you calculated. Fast makes you visible when you should be invisible. I'm going to teach you to be slow, Westbrook. I'm going to teach you to be so slow that the world forgets you exist. And then I'm going to teach you to kill. For 14 months, Hannah had learned. She had learned to lie motionless for 18 hours while Stone observed from a distance, counting every unnecessary movement, every impatient breath, every moment when Hannah's discipline slipped. She had learned to calculate windage and elevation until the mathematics became instinct, until she could feel the bullet's trajectory before she pulled the trigger. She had learned to read terrain the way other people read books, identifying firing positions and escape routes and kill zones in a single glance. But more than technique, she had learned philosophy. "We are not soldiers," Stone had told her one night during a training exercise in the mountains. "Soldiers fight. We decide. We choose who lives and who dies, from a distance so great that our targets never know we exist. That is power, Westbrook. Real power. And real power requires real discipline." Hannah had absorbed every word. She had absorbed the breathing exercises. For seconds in, hold, 6 seconds out, that could lower heart rate below 60 beats per minute. She had absorbed the mental conditioning that could empty emotion from the mind, leaving nothing but calculation and patience. She had absorbed the cold, terrible truth that a sniper's value was measured in bodies, and sentiment had no place in the equation. She had become Rebecca Stone's perfect student. And then Rebecca Stone had died. The ambush had been perfectly executed. Enemy forces had anticipated the convoy's route, positioned their machine gun teams at optimal crossfire positions, and waited with the same patience that Stone had spent years teaching. By the time the first rounds hit, there was no escape. Hannah had been 300 meters away, in an overwatch position, exactly where she was supposed to be. She had watched through her scope as the convoy ground to a halt, as soldiers poured in the vehicles, as Rebecca Stone took cover behind a disabled MRAP and began organizing a fighting retreat. For 11 seconds, Hannah had frozen. Her finger had been on the trigger. The enemy machine gunner had been in her sights. Center mass, clean shot, well within her effective range. One bullet could have shifted the engagement. One bullet could have bought the convoy time to maneuver. But for 11 seconds, Hannah Westbrook had hesitated. She didn't know why. She had trained for this exact scenario 100 times. She had made harder shots in worse conditions. But something, fear, shock, the paralysis that comes with watching someone you love walking to death, had locked her muscles and emptied her mind. By the time she fired, it was too late. Rebecca Stone took an enemy round to the chest at 14 hours, 37 minutes, and 23 seconds, according to the mission logs. She was pronounced dead at 14 hours, 37 minutes, and 41 seconds. 18 seconds between the bullet and the end of everything. Hannah killed a machine gunner at 14 hours, 37 minutes, and 52 seconds. 1 second too late. One hesitation too many. The other enemy soldiers died quickly after that, for more rounds, for more kills, but it didn't matter. The convoy survived. The mission succeeded, but Rebecca Stone was gone, and Hannah Westbrook would spend the rest of her life knowing that her hesitation had let it happen. The aftermath changed her. Not slowly, the way trauma usually works. Not gradually, over weeks and months of therapy and recovery. Hannah changed all at once, in the space between one breath and the next, standing over Rebecca Stone's body in the blood-soaked sand. She would never hesitate again. She would never feel again. She cut herself off from everything. Family, friends, unit cohesion, the ordinary human connections that made life bearable. She spent her leave time alone. She ate alone. She trained alone. She became so silent that other soldiers forgot she was present, forgot to include her in conversations, forgot that the small, pale woman with the empty eyes was even human. They started calling her the Valkyrie, the Choose of the Slain, and Hannah wore the name like armor. 48 confirmed kills in 3 years. 0 misses. 0 hesitations. 0 mercy. She had become the weapon Rebecca Stone had trained her to be. She had just burned everything else away to do it. 48 hours before the assault, Hannah had been alone in the Outpost Communication Center when the intercept came through. Final approach vector confirmed. Outpost 7 remains a priority target. Asset recovery authorized. 12-man infiltration team. Reaper call sign. ETA 44 hours. She had played the transmission 3 times, memorizing every detail, calculating every implication. 12 hostiles. 44 hours. Asset recovery, which meant they were coming for the encrypted intelligence that the Outpost relay station had been intercepting for months. Regulations required her to report the intercept immediately. Regulations required her to request reinforcement from a nearest friendly garrison, 40 kilometers away across terrain that would take at least a full day to traverse. Regulations required her to coordinate a defensive response with whatever support assets could be scrambled in time. Hannah had turned off the communication equipment and walked outside into the snow. She didn't need support. Support would arrive too late to matter, and the coordination would give the enemy time to adjust their approach. Better to handle this herself. Better to be alone. Better to do what she had been made to do. Westbrook. Captain James Brennan's voice crackled through her earpiece, tinny and distant from the relay station 30 kilometers away. Confirm status. Confirming status. Hannah's voice was flat, emotionless, the voice of a machine reporting to its operator. Outpost 7 secure. 2 personnel present. No hostile contact. Intel suggests possible enemy activity in your sector. Stay alert. Understood. She had not mentioned the intercept. She had not mentioned the incoming assault team. She had not mentioned that in 44 hours, 12 of the most dangerous soldiers in the enemy's arsenal will be walking into a trap she was already building. Brennan would find out eventually. They would debrief her afterward, ask why she hadn't reported, ask why she had chosen to fight alone. And Hannah would give him the only answer that mattered. Because she had known she would win. Because 12 soldiers, no matter how well trained, were not enough to stop her. The preparation began immediately. Primary hide, 300 meters north of the outpost, concealed behind a natural depression in the snow-covered terrain. Secondary hide, 20 meters east, separated by a crawl path she dug with her bare hands and then covered with fresh snow. Tertiary hide, 40 meters south, for emergencies. Each position had clear sight lines to the outpost entrances. Each position offered concealment from thermal and visual observation. Each position could be reached without exposing her silhouette against the sky. She dug the hides at night, working in total darkness, using the wind and snow to mask the sound of her movement. By morning, the terrain looked untouched. The thermal blanket came next, the most expensive piece of equipment she owned, purchased with 3 months of combat pay from a supplier who asked no questions. The blanket would contain her body heat, disperse it gradually, render her invisible to the thermal scanners that any competent infiltration team would carry. She tested it repeatedly, having Porter scan her position with the outpost's own equipment, adjusting the blanket's position until the scanner showed nothing but empty snow. 40 hours before the assault, she briefed Fleming and Porter. "You will stay in the central room," she told them. Her voice allowed no questions, no discussion, no objection. "You will keep the propane heater running at maximum output. When you hear the breach, you will hit the floor and stay there until I tell you otherwise." Fleming looked terrified. "Westbrook, if there's a full infiltration team coming, I am aware of what is coming. We should call for support. We should. Support is 40 kilometers away across the terrain that will take 26 hours to traverse. The enemy will arrive in 40. Do the math, Private." Fleming did the math. His face went pale. "The outpost has 3 defensive positions." Porter said slowly, "If we coordinate fields of fire, you will coordinate nothing." Hannah's eyes met his, and whatever he saw there stopped in mid-sentence. "You will follow my instructions. You will trust my methodology. You will survive because I will not allow you to die." They didn't argue after that. 36 hours before the assault, Hannah crawled into her primary hide, pulled a thermal blanket over her body, and began to wait. The waiting was the hardest part for most snipers. Hours of absolute stillness, muscles cramping, mind wandering, discipline fraying at the edges. But Hannah had spent 3 years training herself to exist in the stillness, to empty her thoughts until nothing remained but the scope and the trigger and the targets that would eventually appear. She thought about Rebecca Stone once, in the long hours before dawn. She thought about the way Stone had smiled when Hannah made a particularly difficult shot, the way Stone's voice had softened when she spoke about the discipline required to do this work, the way Stone's eyes had looked in those final seconds before the bullet found her chest. Then Hannah stopped thinking about Rebecca Stone, and she didn't think about her again. 20 hours before the assault, she placed a thermal marker. The marker was a small, heat-generating device designed to simulate body temperature. She crawled to her original hide, the one she had dug first, the one that was slightly too obvious, slightly too easy to find, and buried the marker beneath the snow. If the enemy had any counter-sniper capability, they would detect the marker's heat signature. They would assume they had found her position. They would focus their attention on a hide that she had already abandoned. It was a simple deception. It was also the kind of detail that separated living snipers from dead ones. 12 hours before the assault, she ate her last meal, a protein bar, consumed in tiny bites beneath the thermal blanket, washed down with melted snow that she had been holding against her body for warmth. She urinated into a sealed container that would not create steam or thermal signature. She controlled her breathing until her heart rate dropped below 60 beats per minute and stayed there. 6 hours before the assault, she saw the first shapes moving at the ridgeline. Lieutenant Garrett Sullivan had built his reputation on precision. 12 years in special operations, 43 successful infiltration missions, a record of tactical excellence that had earned him command of the most elite insertion team in his entire theater of operations. He had led men through desert ambushes, urban firefights, and mountain operations that should have been impossible. He had never lost a mission. He had never failed. Outpost 7 was supposed to be routine. Intelligence confirmed minimal garrison, 2 soldiers, rotating on an 8-week schedule, maintaining a communication relay that intercepted enemy transmissions and forwarded them to analysis centers. The outpost itself was barely defended, a crumbling stone structure from a war that had ended decades ago, retrofitted with basic communication equipment and left to decay. The intelligence suggested 2 tired soldiers counting days until rotation. It suggested an isolated posting with no backup, no support, no reason to expect assault. It suggested an easy target that would yield high-value intelligence with minimal risk. Sullivan had based 6 weeks of planning on that intelligence. He had selected his team personally. 12 of the best soldiers he had ever commanded, men who had proven themselves in operations across multiple theaters. He had coordinated the approach route through terrain analysis, identifying a path that would minimize exposure and maximize concealment. He had rehearsed the breach pattern 14 times, until every man could execute his role in absolute darkness, in the howling wind, in conditions that would cripple ordinary soldiers. 6 weeks of preparation, 14 days of movement, and now, finally the objective was in sight. Thermal shows 2 signatures. Sergeant Morrison had confirmed. Scanner presses eyes. Central structure. No movement, no patrols. Looks like they're trying to stay warm. Sullivan had smiled beneath his balaclava. Then let's give them something else to think about. The assault had begun perfectly. Breach team stacked on the main entrance. Charge in place. Ready to flow through the gap the moment the door blew. Rear element positioned to cover the back exit, cutting off retreat. Overwatch taking position on the elevated rocks. Night vision goggles, scanning the perimeter. Textbook execution. Exactly as rehearsed. Then the door exploded, and everything went wrong. Sullivan heard Morrison dive first, the wet sound of a bullet finding flesh, followed by the crash of a body hitting snow. His radio crackled with Keller's panicked voice, cut off mid-sentence by another shot. Then the communications specialist went down, and suddenly the primary channel was dead. Contact north. Contact north. Sullivan screamed into his secondary radio, pressing himself against the outpost's exterior wall. Sniper in the round missed his head by inches. He felt the heat of its passage, the displacement of air as it screamed past his ear and buried itself in the stone wall behind him. His heart hammered against his ribs, adrenaline flooding his system. Training fighting instinct as he forced himself to stay low, stay small, stay alive. Report, he barked into the radio. All elements, report. Static, fragments of screaming, the sound of automatic fire that found no target. Then Kowalski's voice barely coherent. 6 down. We have 6 down. I can't see the shooter. I can't. Another shot. Kowalski stopped talking. Sullivan's mind raced through training, through doctrine, through every counter-sniper technique he had ever learned. Identify the threat. Calculate the trajectory. Return fire or find cover. Standard procedure. But nothing about this was standard. The shots came from different positions each time. North, then east, then north again. The thermal scanner showed empty snow, empty terrain, nothing but the frozen mountain and the screaming wind. The shooter was invisible, untraceable, killing his men one by one with a precision that defied explanation. Smoke, he screamed. Deploy smoke. Grenades arced through the darkness, white phosphorus blooming into a wall of concealment. For 3 seconds, Sullivan allowed himself to hope. Smoke would mask their heat signatures, block the shooter sight lines, buy them time to maneuver and regroup. Then Hammond emerged from the smoke at a dead sprint, and Sullivan watched through the swirling phosphorus as something hit him mid-stride. Hammond dropped. The smoke was useless. Sullivan's hands trembled as he keyed his radio. All remaining elements fall back to... The radio exploded. Pain, sharp, immediate, overwhelming. Sullivan screamed as shrapnel tore through his hip as the force of the impact slammed him sideways into the snow. His secondary radio was gone, destroyed by a shot that had traveled God knew how far through conditions that should have made accuracy impossible. He was alone. He was wounded, and somewhere in the frozen darkness, something was hunting him. Hannah watched Sullivan fall through her scope, watched him clutch his hip as the shrapnel wounds began to bleed. Center mass was cleaner, quicker, more certain, but she had needed to destroy the radio. Communication disruption took priority over immediate elimination. There would be time to kill Sullivan later. 5 remaining hostiles. Elapsed time, 31 seconds. 3 of them were still inside the outpost, trapped between the blown entrance and the rear element's former position. They didn't know that the rear element was dead. They didn't know that their overwatch was dead. They didn't know that their communications were dead, and their commander was wounded, and their entire operation had collapsed in less than a minute. They only knew that something was killing them, and they couldn't see what. Smoke's not working. The voice came through the intercepted frequency, raw with terror. She's tracking us through the smoke. How the fuck is she? Hannah's rifle coughed. The speaker stopped speaking. Through her scope, she watched his body jerk backward and collapse against the outpost's interior wall. Fleming and Porter were still on the floor, hands over their heads, exactly where she had told them to be. Good. For remaining, the survivors tried to rally. Hannah watched them through the swirling smoke, tracked their heat signatures as a consolidated position in the outpost's northern corner. Stone walls, minimal exposure, clear sight lines to the entrance and the windows, standard defensive doctrine. Find hard cover, establish overlapping fields of fire, wait for support. Support wasn't coming, but the stone walls posed a problem. The outposts had been built centuries ago, when walls were meant to withstand siege weapons, and interior stonework was too thick for standard ammunition to penetrate. If the survivors stayed consolidated, stayed hidden, she would have to wait them out hours, maybe longer, and every hour gave them time to figure out what they were facing. Hannah did not wait. She shifted her scope to the outpost's southwestern corner, where decades of weather had worn the mortar between the stones. The damage was invisible from the inside, but from her position, she could see the cracks, the gaps, the places where centuries of expansion and contraction had weakened the ancient structure. One spot in particular, a junction between 3 massive stones, where the mortar had crumbled almost completely away. The wall was still structurally sound. It would stand for another 100 years, but the gap between the stones was wide enough. If she calculated the angle correctly, if she compensated for deflection, it was impossible. No shooter in the world could make a shot like that. Rebecca Stone could have made it. Hannah adjusted her aim by 3 degrees, compensated for windage, factored in the bullet's loss of velocity as it passed through stone, and fired. The round punched through the gap in the mortar, deflected off the interior surface of the cornerstone, and found the soldier pressed against the wall on the other side. He didn't even have time to scream. 3 remaining. The survivors broke. Whatever discipline they had maintained, whatever training they had relied on, it shattered in the face of something they couldn't understand. Bullets weren't supposed to pass through walls. Shooters weren't supposed to be invisible. 12-man assault teams weren't supposed to die in under 2 minutes. 2 of them ran for the rear exit, hoping to reach the dead rear element's position, hoping to find cover that would actually protect them. Hannah let them cover 10 meters before she fired twice. They fell within a second of each other, bodies sliding across the blood-stained snow. 1 remaining. Sullivan. Hannah shifted her position for the last time, crawling from her secondary hide into her tertiary position with movements so slow that the thermal blanket never shifted, never exposed her signature, never revealed her presence. By the time she settled into the new firing position, Sullivan had dragged himself behind a cluster of rocks near the outpost's eastern approach. He was wounded, disoriented. His radio was destroyed, his team was dead, and his mission had collapsed into nightmare. But he was still alive, and wounded men could still be dangerous. Hannah took her time. She watched him through her scope, tracked his labored breathing, observed the way he fumbled for a weapon he had dropped somewhere in the chaos. He was mumbling something, prayers maybe, or curses, or the names of men who were already dead. The wind carried fragments of his voice across the frozen terrain, but Hannah didn't listen to the words. She was calculating the shot. Sullivan's vision blurred with pain and cold, and something that might have been shock. He couldn't feel his left leg anymore. The shrapnel had done more damage than he'd first realized, severing something important in his hip, something that was now bleeding steadily into the frozen ground. His radio was gone. He'd reached for it twice before remembering that it didn't exist anymore, and the backup frequency his earpiece should have been monitoring had dissolved into static. 12 men, the best team he had ever commanded, dead. He didn't know how long the engagement had lasted. Seconds? Minutes? It felt like hours, like the night had stretched into an eternity of muzzle flashes, and screaming, and the wet sounds of bodies hitting snow. But the rational part of his mind, the part that was still trained, still professional, told him the truth. Under 2 minutes. They had all died in under 2 minutes. Jesus Christ, Sullivan whispered, and the words turned to frost on his lips. What the fuck was that? The snow offered no answer. The wind screamed, and the outpost's crumbling walls stood silent, and somewhere in the frozen darkness, something was watching him. He could feel it, not see it. He had tried. God knew he had tried, sweeping his night vision across every snow-covered surface, searching for the muzzle flash that would tell him where the shooter was hiding. But there was nothing. Empty terrain, empty ridgelines, empty sky, empty everything, except for whatever had killed his men. Sullivan's fingers found a sidearm. AM-17 still holstered at his hip, somehow undamaged despite the shrapnel that had torn through his body. The weapon felt ridiculous in his hand. A pistol against whatever nightmare had just destroyed a 12-man assault team. But it was all he had left. He wasn't going to die unarmed. Come on, he breathed, steadying the pistol with both hands, trying to steady the trembling that had nothing to do with the cold. Come out and fight. Face me. Face me like a soldier. Silence. Sullivan waited. The cold crept deeper into his body, numbing his fingers, clouding his thoughts. He was bleeding out. He could feel the warmth leaving him, spreading into the snow beneath his body. And if he didn't find help soon, the wound would kill him before the shooter got the chance. I have information. His voice cracked, desperation bleeding through. Intelligence. Contacts, codes, everything. I'll tell you what I know, just... No. The voice came from everywhere and nowhere, carried on the wind, muffled by the snow, impossible to locate. For a moment, Sullivan thought he had imagined it. Then it came again, closer this time, and he realized with dawning horror that the shooter had been moving toward him the entire time he'd been talking. He couldn't see her. Thermal, visual, nothing. She was invisible, a ghost, a weapon given human form. Please. The word tore itself from his throat before he could stop it. Please, I surrender. I'll drop my weapon. Just... You have an encrypted notebook in your left chest pocket. Sullivan's blood froze. How did she know? How could she possibly? You will retrieve the notebook with your left hand. You will place it on the ground. You will push it 6 feet toward the rocks at your 2 o'clock. His hand moved automatically, training and terror overriding pride. The notebook. The prize his entire mission had been designed to protect. The encryption keys and contact names that made the whole operation worthwhile slid across the frozen ground toward a pile of rocks he could barely see. Done, Sullivan gasped. It's done, please, I cooperated. I've given you what you came to kill 2 soldiers who had done nothing wrong. I was following orders. I was just following. So was I. Sullivan tried to find her. He swung the pistol wildly, searching for any sign of movement, any thermal signature, any indication of where the voice was coming from. The wind shifted, snow swirled around him, and for a fraction of a second, he thought he saw something, a darker shape against the darkness, a human outline beneath a blanket of white. He fired. The M17 barked 3 times, rounds disappearing into the snow, into the wind, into nothing. The recoil jarred his wounded hip, and Sullivan screamed as fresh agony tore through his body. Then the world went white. Hannah's round struck him center mass, passing through his ballistic vest at the weakest point, the gap between the front and side panels where the fabric was thinnest. The bullet traveled through his lung, his heart, and exited through his back, spraying crimson across the pristine snow. Sullivan was dead before his body hit the ground. 12 down. Elapsed time, 1 minute and 47 seconds. Hannah did not move for another 30 minutes. She lay in her tertiary hide, thermal blanket tight against her body, and watched the outpost through her scope. She watched Fleming and Porter emerge from the building, shaking, terrified, unable to understand what had just happened. She watched the snow begin to cover the bodies of Sullivan's team, erasing the evidence of violence one flake at a time. She watched the wind and the night and the silence, because that was what she had been trained to do. Finally, she rose. The movement was slow, deliberate, the same careful discipline she had maintained throughout the engagement. She retrieved a notebook from where Sullivan had placed it, checked the contents briefly, and secured it in her own chest pocket. Then she walked toward the outpost, rifle slung, pace unhurried. Fleming saw her first. His face was the color of ash, and his voice cracked when he spoke. "Westbrook, how did you—" Hannah walked past him without answering. She entered the outpost, checked the propane heater. Still running, still creating the thermal signature that had drawn Sullivan's team into the trap, and turned it off. "Westbrook," Porter's voice, steadier than Fleming's, but not by much. "The whole team. You killed the whole team. 12 men. By yourself." Hannah's eyes met his. Empty. Cold. Nothing behind them but purpose. 13, she corrected. Their Overwatch spotter fell on the far side of the ridge. "Confirm that body when the weather clears." The disposal team arrived 90 minutes later, emerging from the blizzard in a convoy of white-painted vehicles that looked like ghosts against the snow. Captain James Brennan rode in the lead vehicle, his face carved from granite, his eyes scanning the carnage that surrounded Outpost 7 with something between disbelief and awe. 13 bodies, 13 of the most dangerous soldiers in the enemy's arsenal, scattered across the frozen terrain like broken dolls. The snow was already covering them, but the blood showed through, dark stains against the white, marking where each man had fallen. "Jesus Christ," Brennan breathed. Hannah stood waiting outside the outpost entrance, rifle slung, posture straight. She did not salute as Brennan approached. She did not speak. She simply waited the way she always waited for whatever came next. Brennan stopped 3 feet from her, studying her face. He had commanded Hannah Westbrook for 18 months. He had seen her personnel file, her training records, her psychological evaluations. He had read about Rebecca Stone's death, about Hannah's transformation afterward, about the cold efficiency that had replaced whatever warmth she might once have possessed. He had never seen the results of that transformation laid out in front of him. Report. Intercepted communication 48 hours ago. Hannah's voice was flat and mechanical, devoid of anything human. Confirmed 12-man infiltration team. Reaper call sign. Approaching Outpost 7 with asset recovery orders. Estimated arrival matched actual arrival within a margin of 3 hours. And you didn't report the intercept because nearest support was 26 hours out. Enemy arrival was 44 hours out. Differential insufficient to establish reinforced defensive position. Reporting would have achieved nothing except documentation. Brennan's jaw tightened. Reporting is protocol, specialist. Protocol would have resulted in the loss of this outpost and the intelligence it protects. My methodology resulted in the elimination of the threat and the recovery of enemy encryption keys, contact lists, and operational coordinates. She reached into her chest pocket and produced a notebook she had taken from Sullivan's body. Brennan took it, turned it over in his hands, opened it to the first page. His expression shifted. Something that might have been surprise. Something that might have been respect. "This is real." Confirmed authentic. Their communications specialist died before he could destroy it. Brennan closed the notebook. For a long moment, he simply looked at her, this small, pale woman who had stood alone against 12 elite soldiers and slaughtered them all. "You wanted this." Hannah did not respond. "You didn't call for support because you didn't want support. You wanted to be alone when they came. You wanted to prove that you could do this by yourself." Her eyes met his. Empty, cold, proving nothing, calculating everything. The mathematics favored single-shooter defense over coordinated response. "I calculated correctly." The mathematics. Brennan's voice was heavy. "Is that what we're calling it now?" He looked past her, toward the bodies that were slowly disappearing under the fresh snow, toward the blood that was fading from red to pink to white as the mountain reclaimed its dead. "How many is that, Westbrook?" "Total, 61. Brennan nodded slowly. 61. 3 years. Not a single miss. Not a single hesitation. Hesitation is inefficiency. Hesitation is human. Hannah did not answer. Brennan stepped closer, lowering his voice so that the disposal team couldn't hear. I read about Stone, about what happened. Something flickered in Hannah's eyes. Just for a moment, a crack in the armor, a glimpse of something buried deep beneath the ice. Then it was gone. You're not going to find her out here, Westbrook. You're not going to bring her back by becoming this. I'm not trying to bring anyone back. Then what are you trying to do? Hannah's gaze shifted past him, toward the frozen ridgeline where Sullivan's team had first appeared, toward the spot where, 47 hours ago, she had first seen the shapes moving against the snow and begun preparing to kill them. What I was trained to do, what I was made to do, what I will keep doing until there's nothing left to kill or I'm the one who dies. That's all. That's everything. Brennan watched her face for any sign of doubt, any hint that the words were bravado or defiance or anything other than absolute truth. He found nothing. The debrief will be at forward base 0600 tomorrow, he said finally. You'll answer questions about methodology, positioning, everything. Intelligence is going to want details on how you made those shots in these conditions. Understood. And Westbrook. She waited. There are people back home who will want to hear from you. Family. Friend from before. People will remember who you were before Stone died. Hannah's expression did not change. I have no family. I have no friends. I have this rifle, this outpost, and whatever targets present themselves. That is sufficient. Brennan opened his mouth to respond, then closed it. There was nothing to say. Nothing that would make a difference. He turned and walked back toward the convoy, and Hannah Westbrook stood alone in the snow, watching the disposal team begin the work of erasing what she had done. 3 weeks later, Major Douglas Hamilton sat in a planning room 600 kilometers from Outpost 7, studying a tactical map that covered most of the Western Theater. The raid had been his idea. A precision strike on a communication relay that had been intercepting sensitive transmissions for months, causing operational headaches across half the campaign. Intelligence suggested the relay was located at a small outpost on a frozen mountain ridge, minimally garrisoned, poorly defended, ripe for elimination. Outpost 7, Hamilton said, tapping the position on the map. We go in fast, we hit hard. We're out before anyone knows we were there. 12-man team should be sufficient. Sergeant Major Torres stood at the back of the room, arms crossed, expression unreadable. Sir, with respect, I'd recommend a different target. Hamilton frowned. Different target? This is the relay that's been burning our communications for 3 months. Taking it down is priority 1. I understand that, sir. But Outpost 7 has a new variable that wasn't present 3 months ago. What variable? Torres walked forward and placed a single photograph on the map. Hamilton picked it up, studied the image, a small, pale woman with short cropped hair and empty eyes, standing in military fatigues against a backdrop of frozen mountains. Specialist Hannah Westbrook. Torres said, call sign Valkyrie. Never heard of her. Nobody had, until 3 weeks ago. That's when a 12-man infiltration team, Reaper call sign, some of the best operators in the enemy's inventory, attempted the exact assault you're proposing. Hamilton's frown deepened, and none of them came back. Every single man on that team is dead, killed in under 2 minutes by a single shooter who was waiting for them in a snow-hide 300 meters from the outpost. The room went silent. Hamilton set down the photograph. 1 shooter against 12 trained infiltrators. 13 technically. One of the Overwatch team fell on the far side of the ridge. Took them 2 days to find the body. That's impossible. I thought so too, sir. Then I read the after-action report. Then I talked to Captain Brennan, who commanded the disposal team. Then I looked at her service record. Torres leaned forward, hands flat on the table. 61 confirmed kills. 0 misses. 0 hesitations. She was trained by Gunnery Sergeant Rebecca Stone, the same Stone who holds a record for the longest confirmed hit in theater history. When Stone died, Westbrook stopped being human. She became something else. Something that doesn't sleep, doesn't feel, doesn't make mistakes. Everyone makes mistakes, Sergeant Major. Not her. 12 people tried to prove she couldn't defend that outpost alone, and none of them came back. Their encryption codes, their contact lists, their operational files. All of it is in enemy hands now because they underestimated one woman with a rifle and a talent for killing. Hamilton stared at the photograph for a long moment. The woman in the image didn't look dangerous. She looked small, tired, ordinary, the kind of soldier you'd pass in a corridor without a second glance. But there was something in her eyes, something empty, something that suggested the woman behind them had stopped being a person a long time ago. How long is she stationed there? Indefinite rotation, sir. She requested it. Command approved because nobody else wants the posting, and she doesn't seem to want anything except to be there. Alone. Waiting. Waiting for what? Torres met a commander's gaze. For us to try again. Hamilton set down the photograph. His fingers drummed on the table, and for a long moment, he said nothing. Shift the target. He finally said, "Find me another relay. One that doesn't have a ghost guarding it." Torres nodded. "Yes, sir." He collected the photograph and turned to leave. At the door, he paused. "Sir." "What?" "For what it's worth, I think you're making the right call. She's not a soldier anymore. She's a weapon. And weapons don't negotiate, don't surrender, don't stop. They just keep killing until someone finds a way to destroy them. And you think we can't destroy her?" Torres considered the question. "I think a lot of people have tried, sir. And I think she's still alive, and they're not. That tells me everything I need to know." He left, and Major Hamilton sat alone in the planning room, staring at the map, at the tiny mark that indicated Outpost 7. A weapon, Torres had called her. A ghost. Something that didn't sleep, didn't feel, didn't make mistakes. Something that was still out there right now, invisible in the snow, waiting for the next team to come. Hamilton reached the marker and crossed Outpost 7 off the target list. Hannah Westbrook returned to her primary hide 6 days after the assault. The disposal team had finished their work. The bodies were gone, transported to wherever bodies went when the fighting was finished. The blood had been covered by fresh snowfall, and the only sign that anything had happened was a faint discoloration in the ice where the dark stains had soaked through. Hannah crawled into the hide she had dug with her own hands, pulled the thermal blanket over her body, and settled into position. The wind screamed. The temperature dropped. The blizzard that had covered Sullivan's assault was nothing compared to the storm that was building now, a white wall of frozen air that reduced visibility to less than 10 meters, that turned the world into an endless expanse of nothing. Hannah did not move. She lay there for hours, rifle scope trained on the approach route that Sullivan's team had used, on the ridgeline where she had first spotted them. Her heart rate held steady at 56 beats per minute. Her breathing followed the pattern Rebecca Stone had taught her. For seconds in, hold, 6 seconds out. Her mind emptied of everything except the terrain and the calculation and the waiting. No one came. The outpost communication relay hummed in the darkness behind her, intercepting transmissions, recording frequencies, doing the work that had made this position valuable enough to attack. Fleming and Porter had been rotated out 3 days ago, replaced by fresh personnel who would never know what happened here, who would never understand why the snow was discolored in certain places. Hannah didn't mind the new personnel. She didn't know their names. She didn't need to. She just needed to be here, alone, waiting, the way she had been waiting for 3 years, the way she would keep waiting until there was nothing left to wait for. Captain Brennan's words echoed somewhere in the back of her mind. "You're not going to find her out here. You're not going to bring her back by becoming this." He was right, of course. Rebecca Stone was dead, had been dead for 3 years and 4 months, had been buried in a military cemetery on the other side of the world, with honors and a flag and the gratitude of a nation that would never know how good she had been. Hannah wasn't trying to bring her back. She wasn't trying to do anything except exist in the space that Stone had created for her, the space where emotion had been burned away, where hesitation had been eliminated, where nothing remained except the rifle and the target and the mathematics of killing. That was enough. That was everything. The storm raged for 3 more days. Hannah stayed in her hide, emerging only to eat, to relieve herself, to check the communication relay that was her official responsibility. The new personnel, a nervous corporal named Davis and a quiet specialist named Chun, watched her with something between fear and awe. They had heard the stories. Everyone had heard the stories now. The Valkyrie, the woman who had killed 13 men in under 2 minutes. The ghost who couldn't be seen, couldn't be tracked, couldn't be stopped. Hannah ignored them. She had ignored everyone for 3 years. It was easier that way. On the 4th day, the storm broke. Hannah was in her hide when the clouds parted, when the first rays of dawn spilled across the frozen ridgeline and turned the snow to gold. The light was harsh after days of gray, and for a moment, she had to squint against the brightness. The ridgeline was empty. The approach route was clear. The position where Sullivan's team had first appeared was just another snow-covered rock formation, unremarkable, unchanged. No one was coming. Not today. Maybe not tomorrow. Maybe not ever again. Torres's warning had worked. Hamilton's decision had spread through the ranks, and now everyone knew that Outpost 7 was defended by something that couldn't be killed. The legend was doing the work that bullets had done before. Hannah watched the empty ridgeline for another hour. Then she closed her eyes, took one breath. For seconds in, hold, 6 seconds out, and let herself drift into the empty space where she existed between engagements. She would stay here. She would wait. She would watch the ridgeline and the approach route and the terrain that she knew better than her own heartbeat. And if anyone came, when anyone came, she would do what she had been made to do, what she would always do, forever. In the years that followed, the story of Outpost 7 became legend. Soldiers told it in whispered conversations, passing it from unit to unit like a ghost story around a campfire. The details changed with each telling. Sometimes she killed 20 men instead of 13. Sometimes the engagement lasted 30 seconds instead of 2 minutes. But the core remained the same. A single shooter, an impossible defense, an enemy that couldn't be seen or stopped. The Valkyrie. Intelligence officers studied the engagement for years, trying to understand how one person had dismantled an elite infiltration team with such precision. They analyzed her positioning, her relocation patterns, the wall penetration shot that had become infamous in sniper training courses around the world. They wrote papers and conducted simulations and tried to teach other soldiers to do what Hannah Westbrook had done. None of them succeeded. Hannah didn't read the papers, didn't attend the training courses, didn't participate in the growing mythology that surrounded her name. She stayed at Outpost 7, rotation after rotation, year after year, until the position became synonymous with her presence. Nobody attacked the outpost again. Major Hamilton's decision had rippled outward, influencing operational planning across the entire theater. Outpost 7 was marked on tactical maps with a special notation, a warning symbol that meant do not engage, redirect operations, find another target. The communication relay that Hannah protected became one of the most valuable intelligence assets in the campaign, not because of its equipment, but because no one dared to destroy it. Hannah Westbrook's existence had become a strategic deterrent. She didn't know this, didn't care, didn't think about anything except the scope and the trigger and the endless, frozen waiting. Sometimes, in the long hours between engagements that never came, she thought about Rebecca Stone. Not about her death. She had stopped thinking about that a long time ago, but about her voice. The way Stone had spoken about discipline, about patience, about the cold mathematics of choosing who lived and who died. We are not soldiers. Stone had said, we decide. Hannah had become the perfect expression of that philosophy. Pure decision, pure calculation, pure death waiting in the snow. The sun rose over the frozen ridgeline, painting the world in shades of gold and pink. Hannah watched it through her scope, tracking the light as it crept across the terrain she had memorized, illuminating every rock and every shadow and every potential firing position. The ridgeline was empty. It was always empty now. But Hannah Westbrook would wait anyway. She would wait until someone was foolish enough to try again, until the next elite team approached with thermal scanners and confidence and the certainty that they could succeed where Sullivan had failed. And when they came, if they came, she would be ready. She would always be ready. She was the Valkyrie, the chooser of the slain, the ghost that couldn't be killed, and she would wait in the snow forever. Hannah's story shows us that some legends are born from loss and paid for in pieces of the soul. If this kept you engaged, hit that like button. Tell me in the comments, Do you think Hannah made the right choice in fighting alone, or should she have called for backup? Subscribe if you haven't already. More stories like this are coming. See you in the next one.